Before we begin tonight's story, I'd like to remind you to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue uncovering forgotten mysteries, long-buried secrets, and the cold cases that still echo through American towns. Now, settle in, because this one reaches back 4 decades into the quiet woods of northern Arkansas, where a warm summer evening ended in unspeakable tragedy, and where justice, long delayed, would finally come crashing home like a storm no one expected. It began in the summer of 1984, in the small, pine-lined town of Hartwell Ridge, Arkansas. Back then, Hartwell Ridge wasn't much more than a scattered collection of clapboard houses, one gas station, a family-owned grocery, and a single blinking red light that served as the town's only traffic control. The population hovered just under 2,000. People waved at each other from the windows of their trucks. Kids rode their bikes along dirt paths between the tall loblolly pines, and most families kept their doors unlocked, trusting the familiarity of neighbors they'd known all their lives. The heat that year was relentless. By June, temperatures had already pushed past 100 degrees for several days in a row. The air felt heavy, swollen with humidity. Cicadas screamed from the trees like a chorus of warning sirens no one cared to interpret. The smell of hot tar and sun-baked weeds clung to everything. But for 2 teenagers, Lisa Granger, age 17, and Mikey Hollowell, age 18, it was shaping up to be a perfect summer. Lisa was well known around Hartwell Ridge, with dark brown hair that curled naturally at the ends and bright hazel eyes that always seemed full of plans. She was the type of girl other kids looked up to, responsible, kind, but also adventurous. She was a good student at the small local high school, played flute in the marching band, and worked part-time at Henson's Grocery. She dreamed of becoming a teacher one day. Mikey Hollowell was different, in the way boys often are at 18, caught between youth and adulthood. He was tall and lanky, with sandy blonde hair and a quiet smile. A gearhead, always tinkering with old engines in the yard behind his house, which sat at the end of a gravel road thick with pine needles. He had plans to attend a mechanic training program in Little Rock that fall. His mother bragged about him constantly. His father, stoic and reserved, showed pride only through action, helping Mikey rebuild his 1978 Ford pickup and teach him how to fish down at Red Valley Creek. Lisa and Mikey had been best friends since childhood, both born within 3 weeks of each other, both raised in families that attended the same little Baptist church on Cedar Lane. In Hartwell Ridge, it was common to see them together, laughing outside the grocery store, driving down Main Street with the windows rolled down, or sitting by the creek with their bare feet in the water. That's what made the events that unfolded on the night of June 14th, 1984, so devastating, and so deeply confusing. Because nothing about that night seemed unusual, at first. The evening sun dipped behind the ridge around 8:30 p.m., leaving behind streaks of pink and orange that reflected off the window panes of the small houses below. A gentle breeze replaced the earlier heat, carried with the faint smell of honeysuckle and the distant smoke of someone grilling in their backyard. Lisa's mother, Darlene Granger, remembered her daughter standing at the doorway before she left, wearing a light denim jacket, a white t-shirt tucked into soft blue jeans, and her worn-in sneakers. She carried nothing but a small purse and her own easy confidence. "Don't be too late," Darlene called after her. Lisa smiled, pushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "We're just going to the creek, Mom. Mikey wants to show me something with his truck. I'll be back in a couple hours." Darlene didn't worry. She had no reason to. Mikey arrived at his Ford pickup a few minutes later, the familiar cough whine of the engine echoing down the road. He waved at Darlene, shouted, "Evening, Mrs. Granger," and Lisa hopped into the passenger seat before the truck rumbled away. They drove out past the edge of town, toward the old Milner Creek Bridge, a narrow one-lane wooden bridge, about 3 miles down a dirt road that wound through thick pine forest. It was a place young people went to talk, listen to music, or escape the watchful eyes of nearby adults. You could park on the gravel shoulder beside the creek and hear the water trickle over smooth stones. Fireflies danced in the tall grass like sparks drifting up from a fire. Later, several friends would say that Lisa and Mikey had mentioned meeting up with them around 10 p.m. at a nearby bonfire spot, but they never arrived. And when they didn't come home that night, their families assumed, at first, that they had simply lost track of time. It was summer. Kids stayed out late. The world still felt safe. But by the next morning, when the sun rose over Hartwell Ridge and neither Lisa nor Mikey had returned, that comforting illusion began to crack. The first sign that something was wrong came when Mikey's father walked outside at 7:15 a.m. and noticed his son's Ford pickup parked crookedly beside the family shed. The driver's door was still open. The keys were on the ground. And inside of the truck looked disturbed, as if someone had rifled through it quickly, carelessly. He felt an immediate sense of dread, a coldness creeping into his chest. At almost the exact same moment, just 2 streets over, Darlene Granger realized that Lisa's bed had not been slept in. The sheets were smooth, the room too neat. A flash of panic shot through her. By 8 a.m., both families were calling around. Friends, neighbors, anyone who might know something. No one did. Not yet. But the first real clue, the one that sent the entire town spiraling into fear, came when a fisherman walking along Milner Creek stumbled upon something half-submerged near the creek bank. A single sneaker. Lisa's sneaker. The same pair she had worn the night before. And just a few feet away, caught against a cluster of reeds, he saw something else. A dark patch in the water. Something wrong. Something very, very wrong. He began shouting, screaming for help, his voice echoing through the thick woods as he stumbled back onto the narrow dirt path, his hands shaking uncontrollably. Within 20 minutes, sheriff's deputies arrived. Within 30, the area was cordoned off with yellow tape. And within an hour, the horrifying truth became clear. A truth that broke the peace of Hartwell Ridge forever. Because Lisa and Mikey had not simply gone missing. They had not run away. They had been found. Together. And what had been done to them, no one in that small town could ever forget. The double murder of 2 beloved teenagers would haunt Hartwell Ridge for decades. It would shatter families, divide neighbors, and consume investigators. Leads would dry up. Suspects would vanish. Evidence would disappear. And the case would turn cold. So cold that most people believed it would never be solved. Until, decades later, a quiet breakthrough in a forensic lab hundreds of miles away would unearth a secret buried for nearly 40 years, and point directly to a man no one ever suspected. A man the community trusted. A man who had been living among them the entire time. But before that arrest, before the shockwaves rippled through Arkansas, we must go back to that first terrible morning, when a frantic search began, and hope fought desperately against an oncoming storm that no one yet understood. Because what investigators discovered next would raise even more questions. Questions that would trap the town in fear, suspicion, and silence for years to come. The discovery of the bodies at Milner Creek sent a wave of terror rippling through Hartwell Ridge, a town that, until that moment, had believed itself insulated from the horrors shown on the evening news. Violence happened elsewhere, somewhere bigger, somewhere rougher. Not here, not to their children. Sheriff Don Whitaker, a tall man in his late 40s with a stiff jaw and a reputation for calm under pressure, arrived at the creek just before 9 a.m. The deputies had already begun securing the perimeter. Though in a town this small, even the perimeter itself drew a crowd. People stood behind the yellow tape, with trembling hands pressed to their mouths. Mothers whispered prayers. Fathers stared blankly into the woods, their faces pale. Whitaker stepped down the narrow path, boots sinking into soft earth. The summer air smelled of algae and warm mud, but underneath it lingered something metallic. Something too familiar to any man who had ever been at a crime scene. He spotted the fisherman, Harold Renly, a wiry man in a camouflage cap, sitting on a log, shaking violently. A paramedic knelt beside him. "What exactly did you see?" Whitaker asked gently. Renly swallowed hard. I thought it was trash at first. You know how this creek gets after a storm. But when I got closer, he pressed a trembling hand to his forehead. It wasn't trash. It was her. Whitaker nodded slowly, placing a reassuring hand on the man's shoulder before moving toward the water's edge. He'd seen death before, farm accidents, old age, the occasional domestic dispute that spiraled out of control. But nothing like this. Nothing that involved 2 young people whose faces he'd known since they were children. Lisa Granger and Michael Hollowell lay partially submerged in the shallow creek. the gentle current pushing against them as if trying to carry them someplace gentler. Lisa's dark hair fanned around her like a halo gone wrong. Mikey's arm was bent unnaturally, fingers still curled as though reaching for something he'd never grasped. The injuries were immediately obvious. Violent, cruel, the kind of brutality that came from rage or panic, or both. Whitaker swallowed hard, steadying himself. "Get the coroner," he murmured, "and call their families." Those words were the hardest he ever had to say. Darlene Granger arrived first, her sedan kicking dust up the dirt road as she sped toward the creek, ignoring the deputies shouting for her to slow down. She stumbled out of the car and ran, her voice cracking. "Where's my daughter? Where's Lisa?" Whitaker intercepted her near the tape. "Darlene, we found them." Her face froze. She stared at him, unable or unwilling to understand. "We found Lisa and Mikey. Are they hurt?" Her voice trembled. "Are they at the hospital?" Whitaker didn't answer. His silence said everything. Darlene collapsed against him, screaming, a sound so raw it cut through the trees like a knife. Minutes later, Kevin Hollowell, Mikey's father, arrived in his dusty work truck. His wife, Nancy, sobbed quietly in the passenger seat. Kevin stepped out, face ashy, fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. Whitaker walked to him, said the same words. Watched Kevin's jaw tighten. Watched the man lift his face toward the sky as though searching for a reason or a god or something to anchor him. When none appeared, he took a slow breath and nodded. He wouldn't fall apart yet. Not here, not in front of everyone. But his eyes, those steady stoic eyes, looked hollow. By noon, state investigators had arrived, along with a small team from the Arkansas State Crime Laboratory. Word had spread across the county, drawing more onlookers. Friends of Lisa and Mikey, teachers, church members, even people who barely knew them showed up, as the proximity to the tragedy made it easier to believe it was real. Reporters weren't far behind. Hartwell Ridge wasn't used to news vans, but by 3 p.m., 2 of them were parked along the narrow road, their antennas reaching into the humid air like thin metal spines. Deputy Carla Renfro, the youngest on Whitaker's team, walked between the groups of neighbors, trying to keep people calm and back. "Please, folks, we need to give investigators room. Go home. Be with your families." "Who would do this?" someone asked. "It has to be someone passing through," another whispered. "No outsider knows that creek," countered a third. That last comment hung heavy in the air, because everyone knew it was true. This spot, the secluded bank, the narrow turnoff, the old wooden bridge, you didn't find it unless you knew it was there, unless you knew the kids used it, unless you knew the area well enough to disappear into the trees without being noticed. It was a chilling thought. Investigators walked the creek bed for hours, combing for footprints, tire tracks, weapons, anything. But the ground near the water was muddy and churned from the fishing activity earlier. And the dirt road leading in was covered in overlapping tire marks from neighbors, reporters, and first responders. Still, they gathered evidence. A torn piece of fabric caught on a branch, a drop lighter, a partial boot print. Nothing that screamed the truth, but each piece felt like a whisper. One the investigators hoped would one day form a complete sentence. When the coroner, Dr. Marlene Tisdale, arrived, she examined the bodies with a grim professionalism that came from years of detachment. But even she faltered at the sight of the teenagers. "Cause of death appears to be blunt force trauma," she murmured. "Possibly a struggle beforehand. Their time of death, likely between 9:30 and 10:30 last night." The narrow window sent a jolt through Whitaker. That meant the killer, or killers, had only a few hours of darkness to work with. And that meant they likely lived close by. By sundown, the bodies had been transported to the crime lab, but the creek remained an active scene. Deputies placed lanterns along the path, casting yellow pools of light across the water. Fireflies drifted through the darkness like sparks caught between worlds. Whitaker leaned against his truck, exhaustion settling heavily in his bones. "We need to talk to everyone who saw them last night," he told his team. "Friends, neighbors, anyone at the grocery, anyone at the gas station. Somebody knows something." Deputy Renfro nodded. "We'll start first thing tomorrow." No. Whitaker stared into the woods, uneasy. We start now, because a killer was out there, and he wasn't convinced they had left the area. Meanwhile, across Hartwell Ridge, porch lights flicked on early. Parents pulled their children inside and locked doors that had rarely been locked before. Neighbors spoke in hushed tones over backyard fences. What if it was someone from the logging crew? What if it was a drifter? What if it was someone we know? That last question was the one no one wanted to say out loud, but everyone thought it. At the Granger home, Darlene sat on the couch, clutching one of Lisa's sweaters, soft, pale yellow, still smelling faintly of her daughter's floor detergent. A pastor from the local church sat beside her, speaking prayers she couldn't quite hear. Across town, Kevin and Nancy Hollowell sat silently at their kitchen table, staring at Mikey's empty chair. Kevin kept rubbing his hands together, rough, callous hands used to fixing engines, not bearing his son. That night, Hartwell Ridge didn't sleep. Every creak of a porch step, every rustle of leaves, every passing car felt ominous. And with every hour that passed, the fear deepened. Deputy Renfro returned to the sheriff's office around 10 p.m. with a list of names. People who had seen Lisa and Mikey the day before. Whitaker skimmed it, stopping at one name in particular. Todd Brixby, he read aloud. Age 19. Known troublemaker. Dropped out of school. Multiple fights. A temper. He'd been hanging around Lisa a few months back, trying and failing to get her attention. He hadn't taken the rejection well. Renfro cleared her throat. He was seen near the creek earlier yesterday afternoon. A few people mentioned it. Whitaker's jaw tightened. Bring him in first thing. Yes, Sheriff. But Whitaker didn't wait until morning. At 11:15 p.m., he grabbed his keys. I'll talk to him myself. Because something in his gut whispered that time mattered, that the killer was close. Closer than anyone wanted to believe. He drove through the dark, quiet roads of Hartwell Ridge, every shadow thick with possibility, every hollow of the trees holding its breath. And when he pulled into the Brixby driveway, the house was dark. Too dark. Whitaker stepped out of his truck, scanning the area. A screen door hung crooked. A porch light swung gently in the night breeze. And then, a sound, soft, metallic, coming from around the back of the house. Whitaker tightened his grip on his flashlight and slowly stepped forward, heart pounding. Because whatever waited behind that house would mark the beginning of a trail that would twist through decades of uncertainty and grief before revealing the truth no one could have imagined. He rounded the corner, lifted his light, and what he saw made him freeze in place. Sheriff Whitaker's flashlight beam trembled slightly as it cut to the darkness behind the Brixby house. For a heartbeat, he expected to find Todd Brixby himself. Maybe running, maybe hiding, maybe doing something far worse. But instead, the beam revealed something else entirely. A metal trash can lay tipped over, its lid rolling in a slow circle on the dirt. A raccoon froze mid-scurry, its eyes glowing like tiny orbs in the light before it darted away into the trees. Whitaker let out the breath he'd been holding. Just an animal. Nothing more. But the tension in his chest didn't ease. Not completely. Because the house remained silent. Motionless. Suspiciously so. He knocked on the back door. No answer. He went to the front and pounded harder. Still nothing. Through the thin curtains, the living room looked empty. No sign of Todd. No sign of his mother, who worked nights at the textile mill. No sign of life at all. Whitaker stared at the house for a long moment before turning back toward his truck. We'll handle this tomorrow, he muttered. Sunlight will make things clearer. But when he returned to the sheriff's office, Deputy Renfro saw the unease in his expression. Find anything? No, he said, but we'll bring him in. First thing. Renfro nodded. I'll file the paperwork. Whitaker leaned on the desk, rubbing his temples. Tired, overwhelmed, but more determined than ever. Because the clock was ticking. The town was unraveling. And the families were barely holding on. At the Granger home, the living room had become a gathering place for grief. Relatives, friends, church members, and neighbors filled every chair, every patch of carpet, Every bit of space that could hold a person desperate to help but powerless to do so. Darlene sat in the middle of it all, surrounded yet completely alone. She held Lisa's childhood photo album, sun-faded, corners bent, filled with pictures of birthday parties, school plays, and summers at the lake. She kept flipping through the pages as if searching for a sign, a reason, something she had missed that could explain why her daughter's life had ended so violently. Her sister, Marcy, knelt beside her. "Darlene, sweetie, you should rest." Darlene shook her head. I can't sleep. What if," her voice cracked, "what if I dream she's still alive? And then I wake up and remember?" Marcy's eyes filled with tears. "We're all here for you. Whatever you need." Darlene clutched the album tighter. "I just need her back." In the kitchen, whispers drifted from groups of neighbors. "Whoever did this is still out there. I heard they were beaten. Lord have mercy. They were just kids. Kids." One voice stood out, a shaky, older voice. "This town ain't seen something like this. Ever. And I'm telling you, the one who did it ain't far. Does something like that, they don't just disappear." The rest of the room fell quiet, because deep down they all felt the same thing. The fear wasn't abstract anymore. It was pressing in on them, thick as the summer heat. Across town, the Hollowell home simmered with a different kind of grief. Quiet, heavy, suffocating. Mikey's father, Kevin, sat alone in his son's room. The overhead light buzzed softly. The walls were covered with posters of classic cars, old rock bands, and one faded photo of Mikey and Lisa at their 8th grade graduation. Kevin picked up one of the tools on the workbench, a socket wrench, still smudged with grease from the last time Mikey had fixed an engine. He turned it slowly in his hands, remembering the way his son's eyes lit up whenever he talked about cars. His wife, Nancy, stood in the doorway, unsure whether to enter. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Kevin, honey, you haven't eaten." He didn't respond. She stepped in, hesitating before sitting next to him. "The pastor wants to come tomorrow. Maybe it would help." Kevin looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time all day. His face was red, his eyes swollen, his lips pressed into a thin line. "I just want my boy," he said, his voice breaking. "I want my boy back." Nancy wrapped her arms around him and held on, their shared grief pulling them together like tide water dragging two abandoned boats into the same current. Downstairs, people murmured in hushed conversations. "Kevin won't talk to anyone." Can you blame him? That boy was his whole world. They need answers. We all do. Sheriff Whitaker better find whoever did this, and fast. The following morning, the churches in town filled with people praying, crying, singing hymns with trembling voices. The tragedy had cracked something inside Hartwell Ridge. The comforting idea that everyone knew everyone, and that everyone was safe because of it, had shattered. Pastor Roland Hughes stood behind the pulpit at Cedar Lane Baptist Church, his hands gripping the wood as he addressed the congregation. "We come together today not because we have the answers," he said, "but because we need each other. Evil walked through our town last night. It took 2 of our children. It broke 2 families. And we may not know why, but we do know this. Our community must stand together. Fear cannot divide us. Grief cannot silence us. We will find the truth. And God willing, justice will come." The room murmured its amen. But not everyone felt comforted. In the last pew, a teenage girl named Bethany Cross, one of Lisa's closest friends, sobbed into her hands. She'd been one of the people Lisa planned to meet the night before. Bethany kept replaying the what-ifs. What if she'd gone to the creek early? What if she called Lisa one more time? What if? Her mother rubbed her back, whispering, "It's not your fault, baby. It's not your fault." But Bethany didn't believe that. Not for a second. As the Sunday service continued, another group met at the Hollowell home, quietly, privately. Kevin's younger brother, Jim, paced the living room. "Someone in this town knows something," he said, frustration boiling over. "They don't just vanish after doing something like that. They don't just walk away." Nancy wiped her eyes. "Jim, please." "No," he snapped, then immediately softened. "I'm sorry. I can't stand this not knowing." Kevin sat silently on the couch, staring ahead as if he'd gone somewhere far away. Jim knelt in front of him. "Kev, we're gonna find who did this. I promise you. I'll go door to door if I have to. He stopped abruptly. Outside, a truck rumbled to a stop. Kevin didn't move, but Nancy did. She peered through the blinds. "It's Sheriff Whitaker." Jim clenched his jaw. He better have something. But Whitaker didn't have answers. Not yet. Only questions. Back at the sheriff's office, the phones rang nonstop. Some calls were heartfelt condolences. Some were rumors. Others were fear-driven reports of suspicious activity that turned out to be nothing. An unfamiliar car, a stranger buying gas, a neighbor's dog barking at shadows. Whitaker listened to one frantic caller claiming she heard whispering in the woods last night. He took notes anyway. Everything mattered, even if most of it would lead nowhere. Deputy Renfro approached him with 2 coffee cups. "Any word on the lab results?" "Not yet. Might take days." She sighed. "The families are desperate." "I know. We all are." Whitaker stared at his cluttered desk. Files, maps, scribbled notes. Photos of Lisa and Mikey smiling at the camera. Frozen in happier moments. "This town is spiraling," he said. "If we don't find something soon, fear's gonna take over." Renfro hesitated, then said, "Sir, about Todd Brixby." Whitaker looked up. "He still hasn't shown up," she said. "We checked the house again this morning. Still empty." Whitaker frowned. "And his mother?" "At work. Says she hasn't seen him since yesterday afternoon." That sent a cold shiver through Whitaker. "Find him," he said. "Today." Because when a double murder tore through a quiet town and a young man with a history of violence suddenly vanished, it couldn't be ignored. The community buzzed with rumors. Some said Todd had been spotted hitchhiking on Route 19. Others claimed they saw him drinking behind Decker's hardware store. But no sighting panned out. As the sun dipped low again that evening, painting the sky in bruised purples and oranges, Whitaker sat alone in his office, staring at the evidence board. Photos of Lisa and Mikey, the creek, the shoe, a blurry footprint, a broken watch found near the bank, and in the center, a question. Why? Why would someone hurt these kids? Why here? Why now? He exhaled slowly. He needed answers. He needed leads. He needed something, anything, to break the silence. And then, just as he stood to shut off the office lights of the night, a sharp knock sounded at the door. Deputy Renfro poked her head in. Her eyes were wide. "Sheriff, you need to come outside." "What is it?" "A man just came in. Says he knows something." Whitaker's pulse spiked. "Who?" Renfro swallowed hard. He wouldn't give his name. But he said, "He saw the truck, Sheriff. He saw Mikey's truck last night. And he saw who was with them." Whitaker rushed past her toward the lobby, heart pounding. Because if the man spoke the truth, this might be their first real lead. But when he stepped out into the dimly lit lobby, the man was already gone, leaving behind only a scrap of paper on the counter. And what was written on it changed everything. Detective Marlon Briggs did not leave the evidence room for nearly 4 hours. He stood under fluorescent haze, staring at the forgotten scraps of a case that had once consumed half the Boston PD. Files yellowed at the edges, photos slightly faded, witness notes scribbled in frantic handwriting. And at the center of it all, the same sickening mystery. What happened to 24-year-old Emily Carter on the night of August 9th, 2007? Briggs flipped open a thin plastic bag. Inside was a necklace, simple, silver, with a tiny pendant shaped like a crescent moon. It hadn't been logged under personal items. It had been logged under unclaimed evidence. His jaw tightened. "Why wasn't this entered into the main file?" he whispered. The pendant didn't appear in the original case summary, the witness interviews, or the crime scene inventory. Someone had deliberately left it out. And Emily's mother had sworn Emily never took that necklace off. Briggs pulled the chain out carefully, letting the metal dangle in the light. Along one side of the pendant was a tiny groove, barely visible unless you looked for it. A groove that could hold blood. He carried it to the accelerated forensic unit. The technician, Dr. Leslie Moore, looked up from her station. "Tell me this is connected to the Carter case," she said in disbelief. Briggs nodded. "I need accelerated DNA. Any remnants, even degraded material." Moore blinked. "You think this was worn the night she disappeared?" "I think someone didn't want anyone to know she was wearing it." She swallowed and took the pendant with a pair of tweezers. "I'll run it now." While the lab worked, Briggs sat in his office, reviewing the 2007 witness statements. His eyes drifted over familiar names, neighbors, co-workers, her boyfriend, her landlord, and then he froze. One statement was missing. The name printed on the log was intact, but the page attached to it was gone. Gavin Hale, a neighbor who had lived 3 houses down from Emily in 2007. He had only given one statement, and that statement had vanished. Briggs pushed back his chair and stood. "Okay, Gavin," he muttered. "Where did you go?" 2 hours later, just after midnight, his phone rang. Dr. Moore sounded breathless. "Marlon, we found something." Briggs sat up straighter. "Tell me." She hesitated before saying the words that made his blood run cold. "The blood on the pendant doesn't belong to Emily Carter." Silence. "It belongs to a man," she continued. "A man with a sealed record from the mid-2000s. Briggs felt a jolt in his chest. "Name." Another pause. "Gavin Hale." At 1:43 a.m., an arrest warrant was quietly prepared. No public announcement. No leaks. No movement outside the small circle of detectives still awake in the building. Briggs closed the file slowly. A missing statement. A hidden necklace. A suspect no one had revisited in 17 years. Someone back in 2007 had buried this man's connection to Emily. And now, the truth was unearthing itself. Police cars rolled through a silent Boston suburb under the cover of night. Blue lights stayed off. Engines low. The kind of operation reserved for suspects who were dangerous or terrified of being caught. Gavin Hale's house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac. Lights off. Curtains drawn. Briggs approached the front door with a tactical team behind him. He knocked once. "Gavin Hale, Boston Police." Opened the door. Silence. Then a noise. A shuffle. The unmistakable scrape of a window sliding. Backside. Briggs barked. Officers sprinted around the house. Seconds later. "He's running." Briggs tore after them, heart hammering. Hale's silhouette darted across the backyard, stumbling over a garden bed. He wasn't fast, but he was desperate. He made it 10 feet before officers tackled him to the ground. Briggs arrived just as Hale was being cuffed, mud smeared across his face. "Why'd you run?" Briggs asked quietly. Hale didn't look up, but Briggs saw it. Terror. Not guilt. Terror. The confession begins. Back at the station, Hale sat in an interrogation room, hands trembling. Briggs entered with a pendant in a small evidence bag. Hale's eyes widened the moment he saw it. "You left it in the backyard," Briggs said softly. "No," Hale whispered. "No, I didn't. I never touched your necklace." Briggs leaned in. "Then why is your blood on it?" Hale's breathing hitched, and then he whispered the words that cracked the case open. "I tried to stop him." Briggs froze. "Stop who?" Hale swallowed. "Emily's killer." Gavin Hale's words hung in the air like a ghost. "I tried to stop him." Detective Marlon Briggs didn't blink, didn't breathe, didn't shift in his chair. He simply watched the man trembling before him, sweat beading at his hairline, hands twitching against the metal cuffs, eyes clouded with something far too complex to be simple guilt. Briggs leaned forward. "Gavin, who are you trying to stop?" Hale's lips parted, but no sound came out. His throat tightened with effort. He looked like a man drowning just beneath the surface, able to see the air above him, but unable to reach it. Briggs softened his tone. "You said your blood was on her necklace. You said you tried to stop someone. Help me understand what happened." Hale shook his head slowly, breathing uneven. "I knew him. Not well, but I knew him," he whispered. "He wasn't supposed to be there. He told me he wasn't going to show up again. He said he'd stopped following her." Briggs stiffened. "Following her?" Hale nodded, small, defeated. I saw him 3 times that summer. Just watching Emily. Never speaking. Never touching. Just watching. Briggs' voice sharpened. Ooh, Gavin. Hale shut his eyes tightly. A tear slipped free. He'll kill me if I say it. Briggs slammed his hand on the table. He killed Emily, he snapped. And if you want even a chance at daylight again, you need to tell me his name. Right now. Hale flinched but didn't resist. His resolve broke. It was Officer Kellen Ward. Briggs' blood ran cold. Kellen Ward? As in... Yes, Hale croaked. The rookie cop who lived 2 streets behind Emily. He had a thing for her. A fixation. He talked about her like she owed him something. Briggs felt a jolt of shock. Kellen Ward had joined the Boston Police Department only a year before Emily's disappearance. He left the force after 2 years, claiming personal reasons. Something about stress. Something about not fitting in. He'd never been a suspect. Never even been mentioned. Briggs swallowed. Start from the beginning, he said, quietly. The night of August 9th, 2007. Hale stared at the metal table as he spoke. I heard shouting behind Emily's house. It was close to midnight. I was out back, smoking. I know I shouldn't have been. I told police I went inside at 10. That was a lie. I panicked. Why? Because I saw Ward there 2 days before, watching her, and I told him if I saw him again, I'd report him. Briggs clenched his jaw. Did Emily know he was watching her? No. I didn't want to scare her. Hale swallowed hard. So that night, when I heard yelling, I ran over. I saw Ward grabbing her arm. She was crying, telling him to leave her alone. She said she didn't even know him. Briggs' stomach twisted. And then... Hale's voice cracked. He hit her, hard. She fell. He tried to drag her toward the side gate. I tackled him. He pulled a knife. I tried to take it away. That's when I got cut. He gestured to his side. The blood on the pendant. It dripped from the cut on my hand. Briggs nodded slowly. And Emily? She tried to run. She screamed. He went after her. Before I could stand up, I chased him. But he was faster. Hale looked up, eyes hollow. When I reached the alley, she was gone. And so was he. Briggs whispered, Why didn't you go to police? Hale let out a sound between a sob and a laugh. I did. I told the officer on duty. I told him everything. And he said he would handle it. Said he knew Ward personally. Briggs felt ice climb up his spine. Who was the officer? Hale looked him in the eyes. Detective Lawrence Gibson. Briggs' breath caught. Gibson, the original lead investigator, now retired. A man once considered a legend in the department. A man who never mentioned a single thing about a neighbor witnessing the assault. A man who never listed Ward's name anywhere in the case file. Briggs stood slowly. Everything clicked into place. Gibson didn't miss the lead. He buried it. By 4:10 a.m., officers had arrived at Lawrence Gibson's retirement home, a quiet brick residence on the outskirts of the city. He answered the door in a robe, confused, annoyed, silver hair messy, eyes sharp. What's the meaning of this? He snapped. Briggs stepped forward. We need to talk about the Carter case. Gibson's expression froze for a split second, just a fraction. But enough. Briggs saw it. Fear. Gibson's face went pale the instant he heard the words Carter case. His eyes darted, left, right, searching for an escape that didn't exist. Before he could speak, Briggs stepped past him into the living room, uninvited but unstoppable. Sit down, Briggs ordered. Gibson didn't move. Briggs lowered his voice. Now. Something in his tone broke, through whatever resistance the old detective had left. Gibson sank into his recliner, fingers tightening around the wooden armrests until his knuckles whitened. 2 uniformed officers positioned themselves near the doorway. The house smelled of cedar polish and stale coffee. A clock on the wall ticked louder than normal, filling the heavy silence. Briggs stood over the man he'd once admired. You received a witness statement in 2007, he said quietly. A witness who saw Officer Kellen Ward assaulting Emily Carter the night she disappeared. Gibson's jaw clenched. Briggs continued. A witness who came to you terrified, bleeding, shaken. A witness who told you everything. Gibson squeezed his eyes shut. You never logged the interview, Briggs said. You never filed a report. You never listed Ward anywhere. That wasn't an oversight, Lawrence. That was sabotage. The older man let out a long, shuddering breath. There are things you don't understand, he whispered. Then help me, Briggs said. Help me understand. Gibson rubbed his face with both hands. The weight of decades seemed to settle on him at once. Ward was protected, he finally said. Briggs stared. Protected by who? Gibson looked up, eyes bloodshot. By people far above me. The room froze. Briggs leaned in. You better start talking. Gibson nodded slowly, like a man drowning who'd finally stopped pretending he could swim. The rogue officer. Kellen Ward wasn't just a rookie, Gibson began. He was the nephew of Deputy Commissioner Richard Avery. And Avery, he believed Ward could do no wrong. Briggs folded his arms. So protecting the department's image mattered more than a missing girl? Gibson's eyes filled with something that looked a lot like shame. He was already in trouble, he said. Ward had a history of incidents, complaints from women. One had said he followed her home. Another accused him of touching her. Avery made them all go away. I didn't have the power to fight him. Briggs replied coldly. You had the power to file a report. Gibson swallowed. No, I didn't. Avery called me into his office the night after the witness came forward. He said Ward was fragile, said his career and the department's reputation would be destroyed if anyone mishandled the situation. And you listened to him? Gibson looked up, defeated. Avery told me it was just a misunderstanding. That Ward would be disciplined quietly. That Emily had simply run away. Briggs laughed once, bitter. Run away, with her shoes left in the grass, and her phone shattered by the back gate. Gibson flinched. I know, he whispered. I knew it didn't make sense. But Avery said if I pushed it, he'd crush me. My pension, my career, my family. He threatened everything. Briggs shook his head. You let a murderer walk free. Gibson didn't deny it. I was a coward, he finally said. And every day since, I've paid for it. The clock ticked. Briggs took a slow breath. Where's Avery now? Florida? Gibson said. He retired in 2015. But Ward didn't move there with him. Last I heard, he stayed somewhere near Hot Springs Village. Quiet. Secluded. Briggs nodded. This was it. The final piece. Lawrence, he said, voice low, you're going to give me everything you have. Every file. Every memory. Every detail about Ward. And when this is over, you will give a full statement. Gibson nodded, tears in his eyes. I will. Briggs turned to the officers. Get every document in this house. Every storage bin. Every old case file. They moved quickly, and as they worked, Gibson whispered, almost too soft to hear. I always knew this day would come. The manhunt. By sunrise, a warrant had been issued. By 8 a.m., an arrest team was assembled. By 9:20 a.m., they were on a narrow mountain road leading to a remote cabin in Hot Springs Village, a structure surrounded by pine trees so dense they swallowed the morning light. Ward had lived off-grid for nearly a decade. No social media, no credit cards, no registered vehicle. He'd built a world where no one could find him. Until now, Briggs stood behind the strike team as they approached the cabin silently, weapons drawn. The forest was eerily quiet. No birds, no movement, just a low hum of tension. A faint column of smoke drifted from the cabin's metal chimney. Someone was home. The team stacked by the door. The ram went up. Police! The door flew inward with a cracking blast. Officers surged inside. Clear left. Clear right. Kitchen clear. Bedroom. Contact. Contact. Briggs rushed in just as officers wrestled a man to the wooden floor. A man in a flannel shirt and jeans. Gray at the temples. Face weathered but unmistakable. Kellen Ward. He thrashed like an animal, screaming curses. You have no idea what you're doing. I didn't do anything. He fought harder when he saw Briggs. "You can't prove anything. Let me go." Briggs stared down at him with a calm, cold expression. "Kellen Ward," he said, "you are under arrest for the murders of Emily Carter and Joshua Nolan." Ward lunged toward him, but officers held him tight. "You're lying." Ward spat. "You don't have anything." Briggs leaned down. "We have the DNA." Ward's face drained of all color. "And we have the witness," Briggs added quietly. Ward froze. Just for a moment. But it was enough. Briggs saw it. The truth. The guilt. The certainty. As officers hauled him to his feet and dragged him outside, Ward looked at the surrounding trees, at the empty sky, at the world he'd hidden from for 17 years. "It was an accident," he muttered suddenly. She wouldn't listen. She kept pulling away. Briggs didn't respond. Ward continued, voice rising with panic. She screamed. "I tried to make her stop. I didn't mean to." He choked on his own words. "But the boy. He shouldn't have been there. He shouldn't have seen." Briggs inhaled sharply. It was the closest thing to a confession they would ever need. Ward slumped against a cruiser as officers pushed him inside. For the first time in almost 2 decades, the monster had a face. But justice, real justice, was still a long way from done, and the community had no idea what was coming next. When news of the arrest broke the following morning, the entire community of Baxter, Arkansas, seemed to freeze in place. People stood still in grocery store aisles. Neighbors lowered their gardening tools. Teachers paused their classes mid-sentence. Phones buzzed across town as nearly everyone read the same headline, at nearly the same moment. Arrest made in 1984 double murder. Former officer taken into custody. And for a long, breathless minute, no one spoke. Not because they didn't believe it, but because, deep down, so many people had suspected all along that something about the case had been wrong. Crooked, twisted into shapes that didn't make sense. They just never imagined the truth would rise from the ashes this way. Covered in dust, dragged from a cabin in the woods, and placed under the harsh light of public justice. The Carter family was contacted first. Emily's mother answered the phone with trembling hands, braced by her sister at the kitchen table. The officer on the line spoke gently, clearly, respectfully. "Ma'am, we've made an arrest." She didn't cry at first. She didn't speak. She simply lowered the phone, placed it on the table, and leaned her head into her hands as the weight of 17 years seemed to lift all at once, and then crashed down again in a different way. Grief never really ended. It just changed shape. She whispered her daughter's name, Emily, as though saying aloud finally allowed her to breathe. Joshua Nolan's younger brother, now in his late 20s, learned the news on the radio while driving to work. He pulled over on the shoulder of the highway and sat there staring out of the windshield, unable to move. He had been a child when the murders happened, but the loss had carved itself so deeply into his life that it became part of his identity. He'd carried it like a stone in his chest his entire life. He said later that when he heard the arrest announcement, the stone didn't disappear, but it finally cracked. The community held a vigil the following week in the town square. Hundreds attended. Some who remembered the victims personally, others who'd only heard their names in whispered stories. Candles flickered in the warm evening breeze as relatives and friends stood at the microphone and shared memories that had lain dormant for years. Emily's mother spoke last. She'd aged visibly since the night her daughter vanished, but her voice was clear and steady. "My Emily was kind," she said. "She had dreams bigger than this town. She cared about people. She deserved better than the way she was taken. But tonight, I believe she finally has her voice back. And I believe justice still matters, even if it arrives late." The crowd bowed their heads. Detective Briggs attended quietly at the back, sleeves rolled up, hands clasped. He didn't seek recognition. He didn't want attention. All he wanted was for the families to feel something he had chased his entire career. Resolution. Not the kind that erased pain. Nothing could do that. But the kind that offered space for healing to finally begin. In the weeks that followed, more details emerged. A full internal inquiry was launched into former Deputy Commissioner Avery, His role in shielding his nephew came under intense scrutiny, and the department publicly acknowledged serious investigative failings in the original case. The admission was unprecedented and long overdue. As for retired Detective Gibson, he gave a full recorded statement. He didn't excuse himself. He didn't justify his choices. He simply told the truth. The truth he should have told 17 years earlier. Formal charges were filed against him for obstruction and evidence suppression. He expressed relief when the cuffs closed around his wrists. He said it felt like a burden lifting. Sometimes justice reached backward, too. The trial of Kellen Ward took place the following spring. The courtroom was packed every day. Locals, reporters, retired officers, college students studying criminal justice. Ward confession, Hale's eyewitness testimony, and the DNA evidence formed an unbreakable chain. The jury deliberated for just under 6 hours. They returned with a verdict of guilty on all counts. When the judge read the sentence, 2 consecutive life terms, Ward stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, refusing to show emotion. But those who watched him closely swore they saw something flicker in his eyes. Not regret, not sorrow, fear. His world had finally caught up to him. In the gallery, Emily's mother reached for Joshua's brother and held his hand tightly. The tears that followed weren't just for the verdict. They were for all the years lost, all the birthdays missed, all the quiet moments of grief they had endured alone. Outside the courthouse, the wind carried the smell of spring rain. Reporters gathered, cameras rolling, microphones raised, hoping for a soundbite. Something powerful, something quotable. But the families didn't want to speak. They had already said everything that mattered. Detective Briggs stood with them for a few minutes before quietly stepping away. He didn't want the spotlight either. He simply walked down the courthouse steps, hands in his pockets, breathing in the sharp evening air. Another detective joined him on the sidewalk. "You did good work," she said. Briggs shook his head gently. "We did the work," he replied. "And the families, they carried the weight." They walked for a moment in silence before she said, "Do you think it's really over?" Briggs looked at the courthouse behind them, windows glowing with golden dusk. And he thought about Emily, Joshua, their families, their futures stolen, their names now carried in headlines and memorials and whispered stories. Cold cases never end, he said. Not really. But tonight, they get a little quieter. He paused. And sometimes that's enough. As he left the courthouse, the sky darkened to a deep indigo. Streetlights flickered on, one by one, casting soft halos across the pavement. Somewhere in the distance, a train horn echoed across the Arkansas landscape. Long, low, haunting. Life moved forward. Justice had finally arrived. Decades late, but not forgotten. And for the first time in 17 years, Baxter felt the quiet relief of a wound finally beginning to close.